The morning Daniel left his village was quiet, almost too quiet. A soft wind blew through the mango trees behind their old house. The red dust on the road rose gently as people walked toward the bus park. Everyone wanted to see him off, the boy who was finally traveling abroad. He stood beside the rusty old bus, holding a small brown box that carried all his dreams. His white shirt was clean, freshly ironed by his mother the night before. She had hardly slept. She sat by the fire until morning, whispering prayers over the clothes he would wear, over the passport he would carry, over the road that would take him far from her. "Daniel," she said quietly, her voice trembling, "you must not forget where you come from." He looked at her. Her wrapper was faded from years of washing, her hands rough, her eyes tired, but full of love. "I can never forget you, Mama," he said, smiling softly. "I will make you proud." His younger sister, Mary, stood beside her, holding their mother's hand. She was still a child, but already understood that her brother was going somewhere far, somewhere different. Her eyes followed him like she was trying to keep his face in her heart. Then Ruth came, his fiancée. Her steps were gentle, but her face was bright. She looked beautiful, her skin glowing in the early sun. Daniel's heart felt full just seeing her. She smiled and said, "You'll be gone for long, Daniel. Don't forget me." He laughed lightly. "How could I ever forget the woman who owns my heart?" The bus driver started the engine. It coughed once, twice. People shouted goodbyes. Mothers waved wrappers in the air. Children ran after the bus as it began to move. Daniel leaned out of the window, his hand stretched toward his mother. She ran a few steps, tears streaming down her face. "Go well, my son," she cried. "Go and become somebody." The bus rolled away slowly, carrying him from everything familiar, the laughter, the dust, the small dreams of home. Abroad, life was not what he expected. The first months were bright. He sent pictures home. His mother danced with joy when she received his first letter. Ruth told her friends proudly, "My fiancé is in the city now." But then, little by little, everything began to change. The man who sponsored him died suddenly. The rent bills came fast. Jobs were hard to find. Some days, Daniel ate once. Some nights, he slept in a corner of a friend's room. Winter came, cold and long. His hands cracked from washing dishes in a restaurant kitchen. His shoes tore. His eyes sank deeper into silence. He wrote home less often. The calls became shorter. His mother's voice always asked, "Are you okay, my son?" He always answered, "Yes, Mama." But it was a lie. Ruth too changed. Her messages grew fewer, her voice colder. One evening she said, "People keep asking when you'll come back. I don't even know what to tell them anymore." Daniel didn't answer. He only said softly, "Just hold on a little longer." But even he no longer knew when longer would end. Years passed. He finished school, but there was no job, no breakthrough. His pockets were empty, but his soul was heavy. When he looked in the mirror, he saw a man who had carried hope for too long. One morning, he stood by the window, looking at the pale city sky. He whispered to himself, "It's time to go home." He didn't say it with joy. He said it like a man returning from a war he never won. When he finally boarded the plane, he carried nothing but a torn bag and a quiet heart. He had no gifts, no fine clothes, no success to boast of. He only had memories. The journey home was long and silent. And when he stepped off the bus at the village gate, people looked, but no one recognized him. His trousers were worn. His slippers were old. His face had changed. Yet deep inside, Daniel carried a secret, one that no one could see. He had come home not as the poor man they would mock, but as a silent billionaire, ready to see who truly loved him when there was nothing left to gain. The sun was already high when Daniel reached his family's compound. The air smelled of dust and dry leaves. He stopped for a moment at the old mango tree by the gate, the same place he used to sit as a boy, eating roasted corn with Mary and laughing about dreams that once felt possible. Everything looked smaller now. The fence had cracks. The roof had rusted. The house looked tired, just like the people inside it. He dropped his bag slowly on the ground and sighed. His shirt clung to his skin from the long walk. For a few seconds, he stood still, unsure of what to do. Then, with trembling hands, he pushed the gate open. It creaked loudly, the kind of sound that reminds you how long you've been gone. His mother was in the yard, washing clothes in an old plastic bowl. She looked up at the sound of the gate. Her eyes narrowed, confused, then widened in shock. The clothes slipped from her hand, water splashing to the ground. "Jesus," she gasped. "Daniel, is that you?" He tried to smile. "It's me, Mama." She stood frozen for a moment, unable to move. Then, slowly, she walked toward him. When she got close enough, her hands hovered over his face, afraid to touch. "My son, what happened to you?" she whispered. Daniel's throat tightened. "Life happened, Mama." He wanted to say more, to tell her about the nights he went hungry, the jobs that disappeared, the cold that bit his bones. But his voice failed him. Tears filled his eyes before he could stop them. His mother's face softened. She reached out and touched his cheek, then pulled him into her arms. He held her tightly, like a child again, and for a brief moment the world felt safe. But safety never lasts long. A door opened behind them. His younger sister Mary came out, holding a plate of food. When she saw Daniel, she froze. "Brother Daniel," she said in disbelief. He nodded. "It's me." She stared at him for a long time, at his worn shoes, his rough hands, his old bag. Her smile faded. "You look different," she said softly. Before he could answer, a sharp voice came from inside the house. "Who's there, Mary?" It was his uncle, the man who had moved into their house after his father died. A proud man with little kindness. He stepped out, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. When he saw Daniel, his face twisted. "So you're back," he said. "And this is how you return?" Looking like a beggar, Daniel swallowed hard. "Good afternoon, sir." "Don't good afternoon me," the man barked. "You went abroad. You promised to change our lives. You promised to build this house. Now look at you." He spat on the ground. "What use are you to us now?" Mary looked away. His mother tried to speak, but the man cut her off. "You better not bring shame into this house, woman. People already laughed at us for trusting a dreamer." Daniel stood quietly. He didn't fight back. He only looked at his mother, her eyes full of silent apology, and nodded faintly. "It's okay, Mama. I just came home." The man scoffed. "Then find somewhere else to stay. We have no space for failures here." Those words cut through Daniel like a blade. He had imagined many things on his way home. A hug, maybe a tearful welcome. Not this. He bent down slowly, picked up his bag, and whispered, "I understand." His mother tried to stop him, holding his arm. "Please don't go," she said, her voice breaking. "You're still my son." Daniel smiled sadly. "I know, Mama. That's why I came to see you." Then he stepped outside, leaving behind the house that once felt like the world. The gate closed softly behind him. For a moment, he stood in the silence of the afternoon, listening to the sound of birds, to the distant laughter of children who didn't know pain yet. He looked up at the sky, whispering to himself, "Now I know where I stand." And as he walked down the dusty road, the only thing that followed him was his shadow. The road stretched long and dusty. The afternoon sun pressed hard on Daniel's shoulders as he walked away from the house that no longer felt like home. His old slippers slapped weakly against the ground, raising little clouds of red dust that clung to his feet. He had nowhere in mind. Only the sound of his own footsteps kept him company. Every few steps, he glanced back, not because he hoped someone would call him, but because the silence behind him hurt more than the road ahead. The village looked the same, yet different. The same small shops, the same children running with old tires. But the way they looked at him, that was new. Whispers followed him like shadows. "Is that not Daniel who went abroad?" "Huh, he came back like that. See his clothes. God, life can change person." He heard every word, but he kept walking. His heart had already broken once that morning. It didn't need another cut. He walked until his legs began to tremble. Hunger twisted quietly in his stomach. He hadn't eaten since morning. He stopped near a small wooden stall at the side of the road, the kind that sold groundnuts, oranges, and sachet water. A young woman sat behind the stall, fanning herself with a piece of cardboard. Her face glistened with sweat, but there was peace in her eyes, the kind of peace that doesn't depend on what you own. When she saw him, she straightened up. "Good afternoon, sir," she said politely. Daniel hesitated. He was used to people frowning or pretending not to see him. Her simple greeting caught him off guard. He smiled faintly. "Good afternoon." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a few wrinkled notes, and asked softly, "Please, how much for 1 cup of groundnuts?" 100 naira, she said, scooping some into a small nylon bag. "You can sit there," she added, pointing to a wooden bench beside her stall. Daniel sat down slowly. The bench creaked under his weight. He took the bag, muttered thanks, and began to eat quietly. The salty taste filled his mouth, and somehow it brought tears to his eyes. The woman noticed but said nothing. She just watched him, not with pity, but with gentle curiosity. After a while, she asked, "You look tired. Have you come from far?" Daniel looked up. "Yes," he said. "Very far." She nodded slowly. "You should drink water," she said, handing him a sachet. "Don't worry about the money." He hesitated. "No, I'll pay." She shook her head. "It's all right. You need it more than I do." That simple sentence, soft and ordinary, touched something deep inside him. All morning he had seen faces turn away, doors close, hearts harden. But here, from a woman who barely had enough, came kindness. Real, quiet kindness. He looked at her closely. Her dress was old but clean. Her hair was tied with a faded scarf. Her hands were rough from work. Yet her smile was warm, like sunlight on cold skin. "Thank you," he said quietly. She smiled back. "My name is Anna," she said. "People here just call me the groundnut girl." Daniel nodded. "I'm Daniel." "Nice to meet you, Daniel," she said. "You look like you've been through a lot." He laughed weakly. "You could say that." She didn't ask questions. She didn't pry. She just sat there, peeling oranges and humming softly. The sound of her voice mixed with the rustling leaves above, and for the first time in a long while, Daniel felt a strange peace settle over him. They didn't talk much after that. But when the sun began to fall and the sky turned gold, Anna packed her goods into a small bag. Before leaving, she looked at him and said, "If you don't have a place to stay, there's an empty shed near the market. It's not much, but it's safe." Daniel looked at her in surprise. "You'd let me stay there?" She nodded. "You need rest more than pride. Pride can wait till morning." He smiled faintly, touched beyond words. As she walked away, Daniel watched her go, her bare feet moving slowly along the dusty path, her small shadow stretching long in the evening light. He whispered softly to himself, "When everything falls apart, God still sends an angel." And as the wind blew gently across the road, Daniel sat there, a poor man on the outside, but quietly rich with gratitude inside. The next morning came quietly. The air was cool, the village still half asleep. Daniel sat outside the small shed near the market, watching people begin their day. A woman swept the front of her shop. A man pushed a wheelbarrow of oranges. Children ran barefoot to fetch water. Life was moving, even without him. He had slept on the wooden floor of the shed, his old bag under his head. The night had been long and filled with thoughts. He thought of his mother's eyes, the way they looked when he left the house. He thought of his uncle's voice, sharp and cruel. And he thought of Ruth, the woman he once promised forever. He hadn't seen her yet, but the thought of her stayed heavy in his chest. She used to write him long letters, full of love, full of dreams. She had promised to wait. She had said, "Even if you return with nothing, I will still choose you." Those words had kept him alive on many lonely nights. Now he wanted to see if she still meant them. He waited until the sun rose higher before leaving the shed. His feet carried him down the familiar road that led to Ruth's house. Along the way, people stared again. Some whispered. A few smiled politely. Most looked away. But he kept walking, slowly, quietly, like a man who no longer feared what others thought. When he reached her compound, he stopped at the gate. The flowers she once planted were still there, blooming bright. He smiled faintly, remembering the day they planted them together. He stood for a long time before knocking. A young boy opened the gate, looked him up and down, and frowned. "Who are you looking for?" "Ruth," Daniel said softly. "Tell her Daniel is here." The boy hesitated, then shouted toward the house, "A man is asking for you." A few seconds later, Ruth came out. She was dressed neatly, a fitted blouse, gold earrings, a soft glow on her skin. She looked every bit as beautiful as he remembered. But when her eyes met his, her face changed. Surprise first, then confusion, then something colder. "Daniel," she asked, her voice uncertain. He nodded, smiling weakly. "It's me." She didn't move closer. Her eyes traveled down to his worn slippers, his torn shirt, his dusty bag. Her expression tightened. You came back like this?" Daniel's smile faded a little. "Yes, it's been a hard few years, but I'm home now." Ruth crossed her arms. "You should have told me you were coming." "I didn't want to bother you," he said gently. "I just wanted to see you." She let out a small laugh, the kind that hides discomfort. "See me? Like this?" "Daniel, people are watching." He glanced around. 2 women across the street had paused, whispering and pointing. "Let them watch," he said quietly. "I didn't come for them. I came for you." Ruth shook her head. "You don't understand. Things are different now. I have my life, my work. I can't just—" She stopped, her voice catching. "Daniel, you should have stayed abroad. Even if you had nothing, at least no one would know." He stared at her, the words hitting him slowly, like cold rain. "I see," he said softly. "So love is only love when no one is watching." She avoided his eyes. "You've changed. You're not the man I used to know." He smiled faintly, though it hurt. "Maybe, but I never stopped being the man who loved you." She sighed, impatient now. "Please, Daniel, don't make this harder. I'm seeing someone. He's helping me build something good. You should move on too." For a moment, Daniel didn't speak. The world felt still, so still he could hear his own heartbeat. Then he nodded slowly. "I wish you well, Ruth." She opened her mouth as if to say something, but the words never came. He turned away before she could find them. As he walked back down the road, the sun burned hotter. The whispers followed again, but his face remained calm. Inside, his heart was breaking quietly, not from anger, not from hate, but from understanding. Sometimes love doesn't die because of distance. It dies because people forget what love means when comfort calls their name. That evening, Daniel sat by Anna's stall again. She looked at him and asked softly, "You found her?" He nodded. "I found her and lost her at the same time." Anna said nothing. She just passed him a cup of water. He took it, drank slowly, and whispered, "Maybe it's better this way." The sun dipped low, painting the sky in soft gold. And in that quiet moment, Daniel felt something new. Not peace yet, but the beginning of it. The days that followed were quiet. Daniel no longer went near his old street. He spent his mornings sitting under the mango tree near the market, watching life pass, the women balancing baskets on their heads, the children chasing each other with laughter, the smell of roasted corn floating through the air. He didn't have much to do, but somehow the silence helped him think. Sometimes he would look at his reflection in a bucket of water and barely recognize the man staring back. His beard had grown. His face looked older, but his eyes, they were softer. Tired, yes, but no longer filled with pride. Every afternoon, he went to Anna's stall. She always smiled when she saw him coming. "Good afternoon, Daniel," she would say, her voice calm, her eyes kind. And every time it surprised him how her voice could carry so much warmth, even when the world was rough. He would sit quietly on the small bench beside her. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. It didn't matter. The peace between them said more than words could. One afternoon, the sky turned gray and a light rain began to fall. Most sellers ran to cover their goods, but Anna stayed. She covered her tray of groundnuts with a piece of nylon and smiled at Daniel. "Looks like we're going to get wet." Daniel laughed softly, the first real laugh he had in a long time. "It's just rain," he said. "We'll survive it." They both sat under the small umbrella, listening to the rain tapping gently on the roof. The smell of wet dust rose around them, filling the air with something old and familiar, the smell of home. For a long time, they said nothing. Then Anna asked, "Why do you always look like you're carrying the whole world on your shoulders?" Daniel looked down at his hands. "Because maybe I am," he said quietly. She didn't laugh. She didn't try to cheer him up. She only said, "Whatever it is, it won't last forever." He turned to her, studying her face. the raindrops clinging to her lashes, the faint scar on her left cheek, the honesty in her eyes. She looked like someone who had also known pain but learned how to live through it without bitterness. He wanted to ask about her life, but something in her calm silence told him not to. Instead, he said, "You're different from everyone else." Anna smiled. "Different how?" "You don't judge," he said simply. "You don't ask why a man sits here every day with nothing." She looked at him for a moment, then said softly, "Because I know how it feels to have nothing." Those words stayed in his heart long after the rain stopped. That evening, as they packed up, she handed him a small nylon of groundnuts. "Take it," she said. "You'll be hungry later." Daniel shook his head. "You've done too much already." She smiled gently. "Kindness doesn't finish, Daniel. The more you give, the more it grows." He took it, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you, Anna," he whispered. As she walked away into the fading light, Daniel stood there, watching her. He felt something deep in his chest, a feeling he hadn't known for a long time. It wasn't love yet. It was something smaller, quieter, like a seed finding a place in the soil. He looked at the small bag of groundnuts in his hand and smiled faintly. For the first time in years, he felt cared for. Not because of money, not because of name, but simply because he was human. That night, lying on the shed floor, Daniel couldn't sleep. He stared at the roof and thought of everything that had happened. His family's rejection, Ruth's cold eyes, Anna's kindness. And somewhere between thought and silence, he whispered a prayer. Not for wealth, not for revenge, but for peace. He said softly, "God, thank you for sending her. Even if I lose everything, don't let me lose this kind of heart, the one that still feels." Outside, the night breeze passed through the trees, carrying the sound of distant laughter. Daniel closed his eyes, and for the first time in a long while, he slept with a quiet heart. Weeks passed quietly. The days rolled into one another, simple and calm. Daniel no longer woke up with the weight of shame pressing on his chest. He began to help Anna at her stall each morning, carrying bags of groundnuts, arranging oranges, shading her from the sun with a large umbrella he repaired himself. At first, she refused. "You don't have to do this," she said. But he smiled and answered, "Let me feel useful again." And she didn't stop him after that. People started to notice him, the tall man with tired eyes who always sat beside the groundnut girl. Some whispered. Others laughed. "Ah, that's Daniel, the one who came back from abroad and ended up selling groundnuts," they said. But Daniel no longer flinched. He had learned that sometimes silence is the loudest strength. Every evening, when the market closed, Anna would count her earnings, tie them carefully in a piece of cloth, and smile. "We did well today," she would say. Daniel would nod. "We did." There was peace in that little routine, the kind that money could never buy. One afternoon, something unexpected happened. A shiny black car stopped near the market. Its tires kicked up dust as the engine went quiet. People turned to look. The car was too beautiful, too clean for that dusty road. The door opened and Ruth stepped out, dressed in a flowing gown, gold earrings catching the sunlight. A man sat in the driver's seat, wearing sunglasses, looking impatient. Daniel froze where he stood. He hadn't seen her since that day at her house. For a moment, the world went silent. Ruth's eyes swept across the market until they landed on him. She blinked, shocked. "Daniel," she whispered. He wiped his hands quietly on his trousers and smiled faintly. "Good afternoon, Ruth." She looked at him, at the basket of groundnuts beside him, the stains of dust on his clothes, the way the sun had darkened his skin. Her lips parted, but no words came. Anna, unaware of who Ruth was, greeted politely, "Good afternoon, Ma." Ruth nodded awkwardly, her eyes never leaving Daniel. "So this is what you do now?" she asked slowly. Daniel looked at her calmly. "Yes, for now." She gave a small laugh, the kind that hides pride more than humor. "Life is strange," she said. "You left here full of dreams." Now she paused, glancing at Anna, then back at him. "Now you're selling groundnuts?" Anna frowned slightly but said nothing. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't explain. He just said quietly, "There's nothing wrong with honest work." Ruth's expression softened a little, but only for a moment. "Well," she said, adjusting her purse, "I wish you well." She got back into the car. The driver started the engine, and the car rolled away, leaving a trail of dust behind. Anna turned to him slowly. Was that someone you knew? Daniel smiled faintly. Once, he said. A long time ago. She didn't press further. She just nodded, then gently handed him a sachet of water. Here, don't let the dust stay on your lips. He took it, his heart heavy but calm. That evening, as the market emptied, Daniel stood by the roadside watching the sky turn soft orange. He thought about how much he had changed. There was a time when Ruth's words would have broken him into pieces. But now, her pity didn't touch him. He turned to Anna, who was humming quietly as she packed the remaining groundnuts. Her hands moved slowly, her face glowing under the evening light. Daniel smiled. You're not afraid of being seen with me, are you? Anna looked up, a little confused. Why would I be afraid? He shook his head, smiling more. No reason. Just asking. She wiped her hands on her wrapper and said gently, Daniel, people only see what's on the outside. But what matters most can't be seen with the eyes. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something stirred in his heart. For the first time, he felt something close to peace. Something like belonging. He whispered softly, almost to himself, you're right. The wind blew gently through the trees, carrying the smell of roasted corn and evening smoke. Daniel watched the fading light and realized that maybe, just maybe, his return home wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was a test, not for others, but for himself. And that night, as he lay in the small shed, he smiled quietly in the dark. Not because he was rich or poor, but because for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. The morning sun rose quietly, soft and golden. The market was just waking up, women setting up their stalls, men pushing carts, the air filled with the sound of chatter and rustling leaves. Daniel came early, as he always did. He swept around Anna's stall, arranged the wooden trays, and fetched water from the borehole nearby. The simple rhythm of the morning had become his peace. Anna soon arrived, carrying a basket on her head. Her face glowed with a quiet strength, the kind that doesn't fade with hardship. When she saw Daniel already waiting, she smiled. You're here before me again, she said teasingly. He chuckled softly. I couldn't sleep. The morning was too beautiful to waste. She shook her head. You talk like an old man. They both laughed, the kind of laughter that came easily now without effort. As the day grew brighter, the market grew louder. But inside Daniel's heart, something had already begun to shift. It had been months since his return. Everyone had gotten used to seeing him with Anna. The laughter, the whispers, the stares, they no longer mattered. But what no one knew was that beneath Daniel's quiet life, another story was hidden, one no one could have guessed. Before he left the city abroad, things had changed. A man he once worked for, an elderly businessman named Mr. Harold, had fallen sick. Daniel had taken care of him when everyone else walked away. The old man, touched by his loyalty, left Daniel in charge of his company shares and estate after his death. But Daniel never told anyone. He wanted to know who truly loved him without the mask of money. He wanted to see how people behaved when the wealth was invisible. So, when he returned home in rags, it wasn't because he had lost everything. It was because he wanted to find truth, the kind that gold cannot buy. And now, as he sat beside Anna, listening to her talk about her dreams of opening a small shop, he knew his answer. She had loved him without knowing who he was. She had given without expecting anything in return. That afternoon, Daniel looked at her for a long moment. Anna, he said softly. She turned to him. If you could have anything in this world, he asked, what would it be? She smiled faintly. Peace, she said. I just want a small house where I can sleep without worrying about tomorrow. That's all. Daniel nodded slowly. You'll have it one day. She laughed gently. Don't promise what you can't give. He smiled, but his eyes said something deeper. Maybe I already can. 2 days later, Daniel left early in the morning. He didn't tell Anna where he was going. He took a bus to the nearby city where he met his lawyer, the same man who had handled Mr. Harold's estate. They talked for hours, going over plans and documents that had been waiting for Daniel's word. By evening, when Daniel returned, he looked the same, still in his plain clothes, but something in his eyes had changed. Anna noticed it the next day when he came to the stall holding a small brown envelope. What's that? She asked. He handed it to her. Open it. She hesitated, then slowly unfolded the papers inside. Her hands trembled as she read. It was a land document, her name written clearly at the top. Daniel, what is this? She whispered. He smiled softly. It's for you. The land near the main road. You said you wanted a shop, right? She shook her head, stunned. I can't take this. Where would you even get something like this? Daniel looked at her gently. Anna, there's something I haven't told you. He paused, choosing his words slowly. I didn't come back poor. I came back to see who would love me without knowing I had anything. You were the only one who did. Anna stared at him, speechless. Her eyes filled with tears, her mouth slightly open. You mean you're not? He nodded quietly. No, I'm not the beggar they thought I was. For a long time, neither of them spoke. The market moved around them, buyers calling, children laughing. But in that small corner, time seemed to stop. Finally, Anna whispered, Why didn't you tell me? Daniel smiled faintly. Because I needed to find truth. And now I have. Her tears rolled down slowly. She tried to speak but couldn't. He reached out and wiped her cheek gently. You gave me what money couldn't, kindness. And for the first time, Anna held his hand, her voice trembling. Then maybe God sent us to heal each other. Daniel smiled quietly. Maybe he did. That evening, as they closed the stall, Daniel looked at the road stretching before them. The same road that once carried him away in shame. Now it felt different. Lighter. Honest. The same people who mocked him would soon learn the truth. But Daniel no longer wanted revenge. His heart had already found what it came for, love that was pure and peace that was real. The morning began quietly, as if the village itself was still asleep. A light mist hung over the road, and the leaves glistened with dew. The call of a distant rooster echoed softly. Daniel walked alone through the narrow path that led to his mother's house. His heart was calm, not angry, not proud, just steady. It had been months since he last stepped through that gate. So much had changed within him, yet everything around looked the same. The old fence, the cracked wall, the same smell of wood smoke in the air. He stopped at the gate and took a long breath before pushing it open. Inside, his mother was sitting on a wooden stool, peeling cassava. Her hands trembled a little with age. When she saw him, she dropped the knife. Daniel, she whispered, her eyes widening. He smiled faintly. Good morning, Mama. She stood slowly, her face full of worry. My son, you shouldn't have come. Your uncle said. Daniel raised a hand gently. It's all right, Mama. I'm not here for him. The door behind her creaked open. His uncle stepped out, the same pride on his face, only now mixed with suspicion. You again, he said sharply. Didn't I tell you not to come here? Daniel looked at him calmly. Yes, you did. Then what are you doing here? The man barked. Daniel looked around the compound, at the worn walls, at the tired eyes of his mother, at the silence that had once made him feel like a stranger in his own home. Then he reached into his bag and brought out an envelope. I came to give Mama something, he said quietly. His uncle frowned. What's that? Peace, Daniel said, and a new beginning. He handed the envelope to his mother. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside were house documents, the very land they lived on, transferred in her name, along with a check that made her gasp softly. Mama, he said, his voice gentle, you don't have to worry anymore. The house, the land, the debts, it's all taken care of. You'll never lack again. She looked up, confused. Daniel, how? His uncle snatched the papers, reading them with disbelief. Where did you get this kind of money? He demanded. What trick is this? Daniel met his eyes and smiled faintly. No trick. Just the truth you never waited to see. The old man blinked. You mean? Yes, Daniel said softly. The son you called a beggar has been blessed more than you could ever imagine. For a long moment, there was silence. Only the wind moved between them. His mother's eyes filled with tears, her lips trembling. My son, she whispered, touching his face. All this time you were testing us? Daniel nodded slowly. Not testing, Mama. Just trying to see who truly loved me when I had nothing. She broke down then, holding him tightly, crying into his chest. Forgive me, she wept. Forgive us. He held her gently. There's nothing to forgive, Mama. We all learn who we are through how we treat others. His uncle stood frozen, his pride dissolving into shame. Daniel, he said in a low voice, I'm sorry. Daniel turned to him quietly. I know, he said simply. I forgive you. News spread quickly through the village that Daniel, the man everyone mocked, was not poor after all. People whispered his name with shock. Even Ruth heard, and when she did, she couldn't stop the tears that fell quietly down her face. She remembered his words, there's nothing wrong with honest work. Now she understood. But it was too late. 1 week later, Daniel stood beside Anna in front of a new shop built near the main road. The signboard read, Anna's Foods and Nuts. She still couldn't believe it. She looked at him and said softly, You've changed everything. He smiled. No, Anna. You changed me. They stood together, watching the customers walking in, the laughter around, the life that had grown from kindness. The same road that once carried Daniel home in rags now shone under the morning sun. The same eyes that once mocked him now looked at him with quiet awe. But Daniel didn't care for their praise. He had found something far richer. As the wind brushed gently against their faces, he turned to Anna and said, When I came home, I thought I had lost everything. But I found the one thing I was truly searching for. Anna smiled, her eyes glistening. What's that? He looked at her, long, steady, honest. A heart that still believes in goodness. She lowered her eyes shyly, and together they stood in silence, watching the world move softly around them. The journey that began with shame had ended in peace. And in that peace, Daniel finally understood that love, when pure, is the richest thing a man can ever own.